All right, believe it or not, we're at the last chapter, and I didn't realize it, of The Morality of Capitalism. Going to need to, look at the, those little things you have to hang up your dress with. But it was a bra strap there for a second. Anyway, we're going to need to pick out a new book. I'm going to have to go downstairs and choose. I hadn't really thought of it. Got a lot of unread books out there. Maybe I'm going to try to find something a little rarer. Though this one is kind of rare. So this was the last chapter, The Culture of Liberty by Mario Vargas Llosa. And it says in this essay, the novelist and Nobel laureate in literature, Mario Vargas Llosa, dispels fears of global capitalism. And boy, do we see a lot of that today, don't we? Contaminating or eroding cultures, and argues that notions of quote-unquote collective identity are dehumanizing, and that identity springs from the quote capacity of human beings to resist those influences and counter them with free acts of their own intervention, end quote. All right, there's a lot of really good quotes in here, and for a short chapter, there's big chunks that I wanted to bring to your attention, so let's just get started. The most effective attacks against globalization are usually not those related to economics. Instead, they are social, ethical, and above all, cultural. They say this: the disappearance of national borders and the establishment of a world interconnected by markets will deal a death blow to regional and national cultures and to the traditions, customs, myths, and mores that determine, or is that mores? You know what I mean. That determine each country's or region's cultural identity. Since most of the world is incapable of resisting the invasion of cultural products from developed countries, or more to the point, from the superpower, the United States. I want to stop there a second. It's so funny that we in the United States, they will not replace us rhetoric, when it's actually the rest of the world that fears the importation of American ideals. I got another one on this side. On a smaller scale, I understand this. So I'm not completely unsympathetic to that view, though I'm certainly not a nationalist. But I've been one of those ones that turned into my mom, I guess, when you go through just all the different towns in the United States. If you take a road trip and you're like, they all look the same with strip malls and Burger Kings, and you miss the quaint local flair. But they'll get into this a little bit. That inevitably trails the great transnational corporations. North American culture will ultimately impose itself, standardizing the world and annihilating its rich flora of diverse cultures. In this manner, all peoples, and not just the small and weak ones, will lose their identity, their soul, and will become no more than 21st century colonies, zombies or caricatures, modeled after the cultural norms of a new imperialism that, in addition to ruling over the planet with its capital, military might, and scientific knowledge, will impose on others its language and its ways of thinking, believing, enjoying, and dreaming. So that's the fear of the rest of the world for the American hegemony. All right. He continues. Even though I believe this cultural argument against globalization is unacceptable, we should recognize that deep within it lies an unquestionable truth. This century, the world in which we will live will be less picturesque and imbued with less local color than the one we left behind. The festivals, attire, customs, ceremonies, rites, and beliefs that in the past gave humanity its folkloric and ethnological variety are progressively disappearing or confining themselves to minority sectors. But those minority sectors remain even all the more quaint, while the bulk of society abandons them and adopts others more suited to the reality of our time. Notice it's a pragmatic adoption, not a conquering one. All of the countries of the earth experience this process, some more quickly than others, but it is not due to globalization. Rather, it is due to modernization, of which the former is effect, not cause. It is possible to lament, certainly, that this process occurs, and to feel nostalgia for the eclipse of the past ways of life that, particularly from our comfortable vantage point of the present, seem full of amusement, originality, and color. But this process is unavoidable. And that part about from our privileged vantage point is so important. I remember, we're going to go off on a little story here. I remember my grandmother, it was my grandfather, telling a story. Now, this goes way back of, when he was a child, he was playing with some other boys in the neighborhood, and they were climbing up a tree. And one of the boys was, shimmying up the tree and slid down and just got splinters, just like, because I think he was even shirtless, just all throughout his body. And his parents spent hours picking these splinters out of his body. But the boy ended up dying from a simple infection because antibiotics weren't invented yet, it might have been that far back, or weren't widely available because they were in a more rural area. It's easy to look upon the idyllic youth of just playing in trees from our comfortable vantage point, where we don't have to worry about a small cut killing us. The notion of cultural identity is dangerous. From a social point of view, it represents merely a doubtful artificial concept, but from a political perspective, it threatens humanity's most precious achievement, freedom. Underline, underscore, I'm tweeting that. The concept of identity, when not employed on an exclusively individual scale, God, my pronunciation today is terrible, and I'm going to include this with the former tweet, is inherently reductionist and dehumanizing, a collectivist and ideological abstraction of all that is original and creative in the human being, of all that has not been imposed by inheritance, geography, or social pleasure. The notion of collective identity is an ideological fiction and the foundation of nationalism. So now he's talking about some of the benefits of globalism. Like there's some people outside of America who lament that English is everywhere. And he said in the same way that Latin was everywhere in the ancient world. But he says in response to this, how many millions of young men and women around the globe have responded to the challenges of globalism by learning Japanese, German, Mandarin, Cantonese, Russian, or French? Fortunately, this tendency will only increase in the coming years. I'm not so sure about that now. This book was written a while ago. Those AI translators might make it so that you don't even have to learn it, but you want to know you'll learn it through immersion. But anyway, this is why the best defense of our own cultures and languages is to promote them vigorously throughout this new world, not to persist in the naive pretense of vaccinating them against the menace of English. Those who propose such remedies speak much about culture, but they tend to be ignorant people who mask their true vocation, nationalism. And if there is anything at odds with the universalist propensities of culture, it is the parochial, exclusionary, and confused vision that nationalist perspectives try to impose on cultural life. The most admirable lesson that cultures teach us is that they need not be protected by bureaucrats or commissars or confined behind bars or isolated by customs services in order to remain alive and exuberant. To the contrary, such efforts would only wither or even trivialize cultures. Cultures must live freely, constantly jousting with different cultures. A rebirth of small local cultures will give back to humanity that rich multiplicity of behavior and expressions that the nation state annihilated in order to create so-called national cultural identities towards the end of the 18th and particularly the 19th century. So true. So this was an enjoyable little book. It took me a little bit to get through it, and I look forward to picking out something else for you all. Mi guapas de libertad.